Muy buenas tardes a todos los presentes a este evento diplomático, segunda edición del Foro Diplomático de Antalya, en Turquía, la hermana República de Turquía. Saludo especialmente al expresidente José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, al alto representante de las Naciones Unidas para el Diálogo de Civilizaciones, doctor Moratinos, a todos los presentes a este evento en momentos sin duda decisivos para la humanidad. Quiero, primero que nada, en nombre del presidente de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros, agradecer la invitación a este evento dirigido, organizado por el presidente Erdogan, por su gobierno y por el canciller Mevlut. Agradezco la invitación en momentos de graves y complejas dificultades para la humanidad. No podemos referirnos a la diplomacia sin aludir al derecho internacional público, a la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y al multilateralismo, como elementos que debían permitir la expansión amistosa y de cooperación entre naciones soberanas, llamadas a preservar la paz y la estabilidad internacionales mediante el respeto a principios fundamentales. Este entramado jurídico, geopolítico y diplomático surgió luego de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, justamente para prevenir la ocurrencia de conflictos armados que previnieran conflagraciones internacionales que amenacen globalmente a los pueblos del mundo. Lamentablemente arribamos al año 2022, en el pleno siglo XXI, con un saldo nada favorable para el desarrollo armonioso y pacífico de las relaciones internacionales. Entre el siglo XVI y el siglo XX, las muertes ocurridas en conflicto en relación proporcional a la población mundial se incrementaron de 0.32% a 4.35% en tan solo 5 siglos. La evidencia demuestra que, a contracorriente de la pretendida evolución humana, las muertes violentas arrojadas por conflictos han marcado una tendencia creciente a lo largo de los últimos 5 siglos. No es casual que el desarrollo del capitalismo como modelo productivo data precisamente de estos 5 siglos de evolución, signados por su era mercantilista del siglo XV, derivada hoy en capitalismo globalizado. La globalización del capitalismo se caracterizará por la reproducción global y local de estas coordenadas: violencia, desigualdad,
inequality and poverty. President Erdogan said it rightly during his initial address when he called to the sensitivity of the death of thousands of children by hunger due to injustice. According to the Alert 21 report on peace and conflict of the Autonomous University of Barcelona, Spain, in 2021, 34 armed conflicts took place, 15 in Africa, 9 in Asia, 6 in the Middle East, 3 in Europe, and 1 in America. According to the United Nations Organization for the Humanitarian Assistance, OCHA, 235 million people required humanitarian assistance, and this was aggravated in 40% because of the COVID. Even amidst the pandemic, the most serious ever known by humanity, there were no ceasefires in the conflict. Among the main victims, we find civilians, children, and women. Women raise their voices in favor of peace in the world and against wars. If we review the true causes of conflicts, we find that global geopolitical dominance is one of them. The United States tried to enforce together with satellite countries. There is resistance to a new geopolitical morphology leading to pluripolarity with the appearance of new poles of power and the construction of a new world geopolitical order. Today, the world witnessed this dangerous contradiction between unilateralism and pluripolarity. Suffice to see the background, the antecedents, to assess the current situation. In the Gramscian way, it presents itself as the supremacist, exceptionalist world that does not disappear, while a new world of multipolar countries try to birth. If we look at this, the antecedents of these contradictions, we see in April 1949, NATO was created in the context of the Cold War and the threat that the power of the Soviet Union represented for the West, and the so-called pretension to expand communism. NATO, therefore, is an armed arm of the United States in Europe to establish the hegemony of the United States and the markets of the arms market under the securitist doctrine that has not guaranteed peace. In 2019, in its 70th anniversary, the alliance accumulated more than $900 billion in defense expense. After the fall of the Soviet Union, NATO was about to disappear because its raison d'etre has ended. However, it didn't happen. On the contrary, it expanded eastward, trying to extend its might and its bellicose character to the detriment of other nations. And this was clearly stated with the unilateral incursion in the Yugoslavia war. Between March the 24th and June the 9th, 1999, NATO planes conducted 38,000 sorties, bombarding with 23,000 munitions. They impacted in more than 25,000 residential buildings, hundreds of schools, 30 hospitals, 176 cultural buildings, and the Embassy of China. The same year, where this so-called humanitarian intervention of NATO finished in Yugoslavia, the country that participated in the anti-Hitlerian coalition, the Atlantic Alliance started new conflicts in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, just to mention a few. And NATO said that as a collateral damage, bombarding hospitals, embassies, and other targets of civilian life, that was part of the attack, and that was normal. Today, NATO has bases in Latin America and the Caribbean, contrary to the declaration of CELAC that our region is a territory of peace. Old conflict that started at the very foundation of the UN is the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territory. Today, 85% of the territory has been occupied, and we've seen the crimes against humanity in that region. Since the foundation of the UN, we can say that we have less multilateralism and less diplomacy. They have been replaced by conflicts and tensions among countries. Therefore, this is the domination, a domination that in a globalized era is much more important. It is a global dominance, which is a geopolitical matter. The exercise of this dominance is based in factual powers, communicational powers, financial, military powers, that together have undermined seriously the foundations of the United Nations and make it impossible its preventive intervention to favor peace and international stability. Therefore, in a moment like today, when we talk about world wars, like in the 20th century, it's nothing when you see the threats and the consequences that they could lead in this globalized era, where we have massive technologies and lethal technologies. Of course, I refer to nuclear capacities. A fundamental element to understand the current situation and the risks they have for humanity is that the unipolar model of dominance concentrated by the US and its reproducers, well, they confront the emergence of new powers and big economies competing for markets. The major hegemon resists these new equilibriums, and the consequences are the use and the provocation by these organizations. And this is dangerous. The current crisis between Russia and Ukraine, we need to mention this conflict. It is a clear example of stealthy provocation that have broken the balance between nuclear powers. The Foreign Minister of China, Mr. Wang Yi, said that you cannot freeze a lake in one day. They have not heeded the guarantees for NATO not to continue progressing towards one of the borders of the conflict with the nuclear arms, sacrificing not only the Ukrainian people, but also the peoples of Europe and the world as a whole that will be affected by the economic warfare imposed on Russia. If the Minsk Agreement had been respected together with the Foundational Act of Cooperation and Security between NATO and Russia, 1997, we wouldn't be at this very ominous moment for humanity. No one will win in this conflict. European peoples have been requested to turn off their heating and to stop depending on the Russian gas. I think we should call rather for the reflection of the governors to have an active dialogue with one of the parties in the conflict instead of asking for sacrifices for the European peoples. We've been for decades imposing globalized capitalism, and at these decisive hours, we ask for to deglobalize using a single model that is useless. The parties in the conflict should engage an effective dialogue. The United States, Europe, NATO, Russia. They should reestablish the balance to alleviate the anguish and the suffering that we see globally, and that appears in the form of biological weapons that threaten humanity. We join the voices asking for a pacific and solution and dialogue to prevent suffering of the peoples of the parties involved. That's a must today. We welcome the efforts conducted by this forum to try to engage the parties in conflict. The model of domination should understand that in this century, the cost of hegemony could extinguish our planet. Likewise, they have to understand the economic warfares are not conducive but to collective punishment, and they do not contribute to the objective of the United States and its followers. Today, 30 countries are suffering unilateral coercive measure imposed by the West. Just to give you an example, the Iranian economy grew 250% in 11 years of blockade, and Cuba, our sister, has resisted a ferocious blockade for more than 60 years. Now, I will talk about Venezuela. In 2015, Barack Obama issued an executive order considering Venezuela a country, that small country, as an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security of the United States and its foreign policy. Since more than 502 unilateral coercive measures were issued. This represents a criminal blockade against the Venezuelan economy and preventing the enjoyment of the human rights of the Venezuelan people. to use the force and rationality, well, this came to hit the historical legacy of Simon Bolivar and the founder of the liberating Bolivarianism. The Venezuelan people have had a huge capacity of resiliency over these blockade years, inspired by the high values to defend our dignity and national sovereignty. As you know, dear friend, less than a week ago, a delegation of the President of the United States, Mr. Joe Biden, came to Caracas to have a meeting with President Nicolás Maduro and senior Venezuelan authorities. Among other issues, bilateral issues, we addressed the energy agenda in an explosive market as a result of the conflict between West and Russia. This energy agenda was interrupted by the United States in 2019, as you rightfully said, in the framework of the illegal blockade against Venezuela. In this framework of diplomacy, understanding to ratify the disposition of President Nicolás Maduro and its government to have respectful relations and dialogue with the U.S. government without preconditions, without hurdles, in the framework of the UN Charter that enshrine the principles of sovereign equality of states. Venezuela is ready, and this has been already expressed by Nicolás Maduro, to engage financial dialogue with the bondholders of the Venezuelan debt to pay our financial duties. We are willing to have energy dialogue with the producing companies of the U.S. and the world, all of them affected by an inefficient policy. Distinguished audience attending this forum, wanting peace, we need to understand the true causes of conflicts and reduce those. So we need to make hegemons understand that the arrogance to preserve domination is no longer possible. They need to stop it, otherwise a conflict might escalate with unpredictable consequences of planetary annihilation. A new political, economic, financial, communication and cultural order is beginning, but this order should guarantee the efficient establishment of multilateralism with respect and equality, an international law premised on good faith, honesty, and this depends on fighting the rogue media and the destructive power on truth and reality. It is said that the first casualty of a conflict is truth. We call upon collective consciousness, the right to think differently, and led by the principle of being human rights. Albert Einstein said, when they ask me if there is a weapon to counteract the atomic bomb, I suggested the best. The best option is peace. He also said there is a powerful force, more powerful than steam, electricity, and atomic energy. Will. We have no right to live the life of humanity in the hands of a conflict. It is up to us to go back to dialogue and respect of plurality of nations. We cannot say that war is inevitable. The will of the people demands that the peace should be the future. So peace be with you forever. Thank you very much.